This is the first in a series of 3 special reports on the state of our economy, featuring the views of Treasury Secretary William E. Simon. I'm Gene Valentino, Mutual News, Washington. We'll discuss the cause of the most devastating economic slump since the 30s and the plight of this nation in its struggle to recover. How did it happen? Where do we now stand? And what does the future hold? We'll be probing that in just a moment. Whatever caused this economic chaos? Ironically, the nation was prospering in 1973 and early 1974, although it's now seen as a false prosperity. Unemployment was low. A Detroit automobile maker was talking about a 5% rise in the sales of new cars then, and a survey of leading economists forecast a fourth quarter upturn. It's now said that rampant inflation had distorted the true picture, swelling profits and sales figures, and even distorting government economic statistics, making it hard to see that a recession was really in the making. Businessmen were buying goods and stockpiling, while the purchasing power got weaker. Well then, if inflation triggered the recession, what caused the inflation?
Well, clearly the fundamental cause of our inflation has been the excessive and irresponsible fiscal and monetary policies of the past decade. As I say, much of today's inflation can be directly traced to excessive government spending. A widely accepted theory of economics is that when the economy is weak, deficit spending by the government helps to pump it up. Conversely, however, when the economy is strong, the government should discipline itself to achieve budget surpluses and stabilize prices. Instead, in our incessant desire to buy more than we can afford, we've slipped into deficit spending almost every single year, good and bad.
Secretary of the Treasury William E. Simon, whose predictions of recovery many months ago have held largely true. Deficit spending. We hear that term so often. Just what is it?
Deficit spending is purely spending more than we take in revenues.
And so it happened. Economic chaos, further compounded by the Arab oil embargo, which saw the price of oil quadrupled, and then further staggered the economy with energy problems. Secretary Simon's predictions then proved mostly accurate. In October of last year, Simon was asked if he thought we were anywhere near the point where inflation begins to turn back.
Well, at that time I said it is difficult to say that the worst has been seen, and I felt that you'd begin to see the specific results as far as the CPI and the GNP deflator, the common measurements of our inflation problem, by the spring of next year. I also said it's going to be stubborn, and that's what I meant by taking a long time. And at that point, we had double-digit inflation, and as I say, by spring of this year, that inflation had declined under 6%.
This is a special report on the state of our economy with Secretary of the Treasury William E. Simon. I'm Gene Valentino, Mutual News, Washington. We'll continue with our guest in just 1 minute. The economy is beginning to recover. It's begun, with all the road signs pointing up, but it's not a smooth road. And yet seemingly inconsistent with this upward trend is the problem of unemployment.
Unfortunately, unemployment is going to remain unacceptably high because, as everyone knows, unemployment only begins to decline and responds to increased economic activity with a lag.
An outspoken critic of the administration, labor leader George Meany, has rebuked the optimism that's been upheld for economic recovery. He viewed the unemployment picture as getting worse.
Despite all the official optimistic rhetoric from the administration, unemployment will be greater a few months from now than it is at the present time.
Of prime importance to the labor leader is full employment.
We don't look at full employment as one of those philosophically correct things that social workers talk about. Full employment to us is an economic necessity. Jobs are the lifeblood of the American economic system.
And such is the stand of the labor leader. Unemployment in the neighborhood of 9% poses a constant concern to all, and it's a temptation to government to increase spending programs. Secretary Simon addressed the NAACP convention in Washington recently, and he put it on the line.
I didn't come here today to propose any miracles or to promise you a millennium in the morning. And even if I did, you wouldn't believe me. Because I think that Americans of all races and creeds are sick and tired of political flim-flam.
As to the problems of minorities, well, he told it the way it is.
We don't pretend to know all of the answers. We don't have a corner on the economic wisdom. We welcome fresh ideas, as well as opposing points of view.
A strong position has been taken by Secretary Simon. He opposes the role of big government as an employer. We'll discuss this in just a moment. This special report is coming to you from Mutual News. The role of big government has come under constant fire from Secretary Simon. He claims big government in its eagerness to combat the recession and inflation. More and more Americans have been seduced by the ideas of bigger and new federal spending programs and wage price controls. He says this is dangerous to our way of life.
Well, 1 out of every 6 workers in America is employed by federal, state, or local government. The government has become the nation's biggest boss, with more employees than the auto industry, steel industry, and all other durable goods manufacturers combined. It's been clear to me for some time that we have more government than we need, more government than most people want, and certainly more government than we're willing to pay for. Big government isn't undesirable per se, any more than bigness in any organization is undesirable. But big government has become bad government because of what it has done to our economy and to our personal freedom.
Secretary Simon has long maintained that excessive government spending has been largely responsible for the rampant inflation, which in turn gave rise to the recession. He has charged big government as being significantly responsible for the economic woes we've endured.
The very nature of government and the bureaucracy is to regulate and carry out the policies that are the ordinary functions of our free enterprise system and the people in America. And it is a fact of life that when government usurps these functions and we've lost our economic freedoms, then the personal and political freedoms are not far behind.
But this economic problem, this serious condition, how did it come to be? Secretary Simon's contention is that the nation has slipped into deficit spending almost every year through a constant desire to buy more than we can afford. Another bad seed that helped bring on the downfall in our economy has been the nation's monetary policy. During a 10-year period between 1955 and 1965, the money supply grew at a rate of about 2.5% a year, and the nation enjoyed a period of reasonable price stability. But from 1965 on, the annual rate of increase in a money supply more than doubled to almost 6%, and that's far beyond the level needed for stable economic growth. As a result, the only way that extra money could be absorbed was through higher prices, and that condition was fired up further by exploding prices of food and oil. And 1974 found itself with the highest peacetime inflation on record. That's what caused the inflation. And then inflation triggered the economy downward toward a recession. Rising prices caused the biggest drop in consumer spending since World War II. And then, when inflation drove up the interest rates, housing also fell into a horrendous slump. Housing, one of the nation's largest industry. This is a special report on the state of the economy. I'm Gene Valentino, Mutual News, Washington. I'll be back in a moment. This has been the first in a series of 3 special reports on the state of the economy with Treasury Secretary William E. Simon. I'm Gene Valentino. This is Mutual, your network for news and sports.